I'm not entirely shocked that it came to this conclusion. As I spoke about last week on the podcast with Mike Silver, Jeff Stoutland, his role had changed kind of midseason in terms of the run game coordinator stuff. He wasn't doing as much of it, it was unlikely to do it moving forward with the new scheme, the new hire, offensive coordinator. And, I think essentially what happened here is that Jeff, had these meetings with the Eagles and decided, from what I understand, it was his decision alone that he no longer wants to coach for the Eagles. And they wanted him to coach, but they wanted him to return as offensive line coach. Now, I think he probably still technically would have had the title because of his contract, but he was not going to be overseeing the run game. And we now find out they moved very quickly in hiring someone to replace him. You reported that today. Ryan Mahaffey will be the run game coordinator and also / tight ends coach, which means that Jason Michael is out. But before we kind of really dive into this Jeff Stoutland story, first off, what is your kind of initial takeaway when you heard it? And what do you think will happen with the offensive line moving forward?
Yeah, I think to echo what you said, not necessarily a surprise, especially considering the fact we knew that this Eagles offense was going to change to some extent under Sean Mannion now as offensive coordinator. I guess the question that we all had was, okay, how much is this offense realistically going to change? We've seen in the past, thinking back to 2024 when Kellen Moore was hired as offensive coordinator, the only offensive coordinator who didn't have a connection to Nick Sirianni. We didn't see this overwhelming overhaul of the Eagles offense. We didn't see this overwhelming overhaul of the Eagles offensive staff. So I think there was reason to be skeptical about how much leeway Mannion was going to have to truly overhaul the offense. And granted, we still don't know, but what we do know now is that there are going to be some offensive changes at the very least to this staff, which signals that there is going to be a change in offensive scheme to some extent. Given the fact that Stoutland doesn't have a history in the Shanahan-McVay offense, it kind of signals that that is the direction that the Eagles offense is going to go into as Mannion gets comfortable here and gets acclimated here. So I'm curious to see, of course, how this offense is going to come together, but clearly Stoutland is not going to be a part of it, at the very least as offensive line coach or run game coordinator, which I think makes sense from the standpoint that they're going to change the offense. To me, what doesn't entirely make sense is how this was handled and the fact that Stoutland kind of chose to leave on his own terms and couldn't, I guess, be involved in any sort of way, or, just kind of how this past season was handled. That to me seems like it was a little bit messy, which is surprising. But what did you especially just kind of the way that Stoutland is leaving? What did you make of all of this?
Yeah, it's messy. And, the most obvious way that is messy, at least that I could put forward, is that, the Eagles and Stoutland had kind of agreed to release statements at the same time, and he jumped the gun before that happened. And he issued his own tweet saying that, that he was out. So I think he wanted to make it very clear and doing so, by doing that he wasn't on the same page as the Eagles. And yeah, I mean, there's just no secret here that it had gotten kind of stale to some extent, and the relationship started to be a little bit fractured this season when, I don't know the exact time. I guess would be after that week 6, that mini bye, when you started seeing more, the under center stuff. You started seeing more 6-0 linemen. Not that they haven't done that stuff before, not that Jeff Stoutland can't coach that stuff up. But I think that, that meant that Nick and Kevin Patullo, the offensive coordinator, wanted to kind of do a little more of this. And when you're trying to marry under center stuff, you're trying to marry the pass with the run, you're not going to get to the stuff that Stoutland has really kind of coached up, the way that his blocking schemes, obviously that inside zone, they wanted to do a little more outside stuff. They did that in that Giants game. If you recall, that was probably the best the run game had looked all season. And they felt, okay, we got something here. Let's do more of that. And I think that's pretty much when, it wasn't like a cut and dry thing. And I think other people had taken my initial report that he was demoted. It wasn't like he was demoted. He just wasn't doing as much. And this happens, a lot. But to happen to, one of the most esteemed offensive line coaches and the run game coordinator, the things, look at the run game over the years, and it's just been a steady stream of success. Three different coaching, tenures with Chip Kelly and Doug Peterson and now Nick Sirianni, and Stoutland's been kind of at the center of that all. Now, look, he isn't chiefly responsible for that. A lot of it has to do with the talent that they've acquired, the coaches at the helm. But, I think Stoutland, felt like he had earned the right to kind of keep being in charge of that. And if you look at the success that they've had and doing so, maybe, you felt like, okay, we can get this thing going, or, and they, let's step back and look at it. I mean, there was maybe a little improvement, aside from that Giants game, but marginal. It wasn't like it really got a lot better. And I'm not saying that that's all on Nick Sirianni and Kevin Toole, as we pointed out before. A lot of it has to do with the fact that Jalen Hurts wasn't running as much and probably didn't want to run as much, and all the other issues that we have chronicled here about the offensive line and the injuries that they've had. And those guys weren't playing better. This is what I will say too, as well. I mean, I know there was a ESPN report from Tim McManus that Jeff Stoutland was frustrated with all this. Yeah, I mean, I certainly confirm that. But I think there were also in turn frustrations from the Eagles, and not only from the coaches, but from what I understand, some of the players. And you get that from time to time, players with coaches. But this is the first time that I kind of started getting the murmurs about some frustration with Stout this year. And I think the players and the offensive linemen wanted more under center stuff too, because it makes it really easier on them. So I think there was just that conflict there, and it was kind of boiling, and it got to that point. Now, that being said, I don't think any of the offensive linemen wanted Stoutland out, right? I ran into to three of them, four of the five that were on the offensive line in the 2022 Super Bowl last night at the New Heights Super Bowl party. Jason Kelce, of course, Jordan Mailata, Lane Johnson, and Landon Dickerson. What I can say is that they're all healthy and fine. As a social event, I'll keep that pretty much, to myself in terms of those conversations. But they're here. Hopefully I'll bump into them and can get them on the record to speak about what happened there as well. What about his legacy, real quick? I do think, maybe there'll be another time for that, but, how are they going to replace him? I mean, there's only so many offensive line coaches. A few of us last night, a few of us reporters were trying to kind of list the guys of the last 20 something years that have that kind of cachet. There aren't many that are going to step into those shoes and fill them completely. Now, there's probably some young and up and coming guys, but what do you think about Stoutland? You covered him now for a little bit, but obviously have followed the team long enough to know what he has contributed to this franchise.
Yeah, I think you can probably replace him in title, and the Eagles have already started to do that, at least in part, in hiring a new run game coordinator. But to replace him in human being and in presence, in just like his ability to develop players and to be able to pluck players like Jordan Mailata out of obscurity and to help develop them. And granted, Jordan deserves a lot of credit for his own development, but at the end of the day, Stoutland also taught him and empowered him to develop into the player that he is today. Those coaches don't just grow on trees, and they certainly, it takes time to be able to grow into that stature and to earn that kind of respect from the players. So I think that in and of itself, like, I don't know how you replace that. I don't want to say impossible, but it's certainly difficult. And at the same time, I think things can be true that, like, the offense needs to evolve, the offense needs to change. And I don't think it's necessarily wrong to want change at the position, but to lose that influence entirely, I think that would be tough, I think, for the Eagles to stomach, especially, just given how the relationship soured there too. I don't think that can make Eagles fans feel very good. But I see this as a loss, but I also see this for the Eagles, but I also see this as an opportunity to grow and to evolve the offense, which is something that I think most people would agree that the Eagles needed to do at the end, coming off of that season.
Yeah, I mean, it's their team. It's Nick Sirianni's, it's his team, his offense, and they feel it's necessary. Yeah, Evolve is you used it, and Nick Sirianni used it, and a lot of it has to do with the quarterback, a lot of it, and they're basically signaling to not only Jeff Stoutland and the coaches, and we've now seen with Mahaffey coming in, that Jason Michaels will be out as tight end coach. It looks like Scott Loeffler, quarterback's coach, will be out. I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Moorhead, the wide receivers coach, doesn't come back either. But it's like, hey, get on board, or we're moving along. And that's not just the coaches, but that's going to be Jalen Hurts, and that's going to be a lot of the other players as well. with Stoutland, you wonder, at his age, 64, he's done it his way for so long. There would have been a complete change, not a complete change, but a drastic change in terms of the blocking structures and the way they do things in that Shanahan scheme, that McVay scheme. This is something that he wanted to do at this stage of his career. And, the Eagles have said that they want him to be still around the team and kind of like as a advisor, kind of senior mentor. And I'm not sure if that's what Stoutland wants to do. Maybe he takes steps back, talks to his family. He's had some health issues that have gone public at times. Remember the one time he had to leave the game in New York. And so, I'm sure his family wants him to kind of, get that all figured out as well. But, it sounds like a lot of people think that he could be following Frank Reich, who just became the offensive coordinator of the Jets, back to his hometown of New York. So it would be kind of coming full circle for Stoutland. But you could be certain any team that needs an offensive line coach, and maybe some that already have them, they're going to be coming after this guy. I mean, they're going to want to bring Jeff Stoutland in. I mean, look at his record. Yeah, I don't know if there's many guys, offensive line coaches, that can point to 3 surefire Hall of Famers that have worked under him: Jason Peters, Jason Kelce, and Lane Johnson. All those guys are going to eventually be in Canton. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that Jordan Mailata at some point, he certainly has the talent, could be that, to play to that level as well. I mean, that's got to be unprecedented. Howard Mudd was a kind of a, legendary offensive line coach, and he coached Walter Johnson, and he'll get some credit for Jason Peters. He obviously preceded Jeff Stoutland. And there have been other guys, but Stoutland's been a lot, been the guy. And I'm not saying he's perfect. We saw this past year. I think he has to look in the mirror as well. And I think he would say that, he is responsible for, some of the regression up, up front. But the injuries, as we talked about, to Landon Dickerson and Lane Johnson and, Cam Jurgens, and I think Jordan Mailata to some extent really made it hard on everybody on the offensive side of the ball. Now, in terms of Lane and his future, here's what I can say. He's definitely not sure if he's coming back or not, is the impression that I get. And you would think that maybe this would make it a little less likely. Does he want to have to, kind of not start all over? I mean, with Lane Johnson, just kind of put him out there on the island. It doesn't, I don't think that's a huge thing. And I think he may kind of embrace the changes that are going to be made in terms of the run blocking. But it could take, the Eagles basically, showing them how much he means to them for him to be back for another season. And, I think he's kind of earned that right. And look, they would be up Schitt's Creek without him. I think, this is again another Hall of Famer, surefire Hall of Famer. And I know that, the injuries are a concern. I know he's working really hard to get that foot back to 100%. He's not stopping his rehab. He's not stopping all the crazy workouts that Lane does. So I keep leaning that he will be back for a last season. I don't know how you feel about it. Landon Dickerson, maybe even more of a question mark to me. How do you see it?
I guess my question kind of to follow up with you is so it's not as much of an injury health thing for Lane as it is a getting on board with the direction of the offense thing?
And I think it's like, do they want to do this again? Ultimately, I think when you're looking at retirement, it's just like, okay, can I just go through, can my body do it again? Do I want to do it again? Lane has a very high standard for himself. He wants to be known as the best or the best ever or the best that are currently playing. So understandably so. So it's like, can I still do it? And, is it worth it with all the changes, I guess, is probably how. I don't know that for certain about the changes.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't talked to him about that specifically. But yeah, they need him. I don't know who they'll have, obviously they're going to have to address the offensive line in the draft early. I think whether Lane comes back or not, they need a succession plan. My guess, if it gun to my head, I think Lane could be compelled to come back.